seminar committee, and I welcome all the speakers who don't really need an introduction, Daljit, P. Sainath and Jagmati Sangwan. I'll request Shomajit to just introduce the program and then request the speakers to speak one by one before all of you, place their thoughts before all of you. Shomajit.
Thank you. From the Democratic Teachers Front, we are really indeed glad to have all of you. Most of you do not need an introduction, but it still might be job to do so. We have had one of the most important events, over the last more than 1 year, one of the largest farmers movement in many years. And maybe some of them are calling it one of the largest farmers movements in the history. And all of you have been the speakers, witness to that, have been planners of that. And we are indeed extremely grateful to have all of you here. I think we'll have the order of speakers like Daljit first, followed by Jagmati Sangwan, and then P. Sainath, in that order. And roughly about half an hour for each speaker, 20 minutes to half an hour, and then we'll open up for discussions. So without delaying it in more, I will just introduce Daljit, who is an independent documentary filmmaker, a freelance writer, and he works with Punjab Digital Library as a director of communications. And he has worked extensively. He has made films on agricultural labor, on mass movements and human rights, environmentalism. And he's also made an extremely important documentary on one of our forgotten history, the Singapore Mutiny, which happened at the time of the First World War, inspired by the Ghadar Party against the British imperial rulers by the Indian army stationed there. This has almost been forgotten, and Daljit has brought this up. We'll sometime later, we'll definitely should see this film, invite you for that. And so without delaying any further, I will ask Daljit to speak. Daljit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Democratic Teachers Front, New Delhi, Delhi University, for inviting me here.
Please keep all of your mics silent.
So at this point of time, it's really difficult to talk about the movement that we all have seen in the recent past. As when it was happening, it was quite incomprehensible movement, and when it has passed a very important phase, when it is going to enter another phase, it is again the incomprehensibility of the movement has increased manifold. So so for a person like me, it is quite difficult to talk in definite terms at this point of time, but I'd like to share some of my insights about the movement, which I think that they remained central throughout the movement, right from the beginning. So when this movement reached Delhi from Punjab and Haryana, so I'll come back to Punjab and Haryana once again, but to start my point, when this movement reached New Delhi from Punjab and Haryana, and thereafter from Uttar Pradesh, so there were certain questions around the movement. Who are these people? Where have they come from? How can so many people be mobilized and brought to Delhi? How can they take control of the roads? So one of the important question coming from the people who were sympathetic towards the movement, that was really important question. And the question was, the movement is great, but there is no leadership. Where are the leaders? So right in the beginning, the question was that the movement is leadership, so there need to be a leader. So the search for a leader of the movement, which was very much there, after doing substantial groundwork in Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh. So that question was really important to understand the kind of situation this moment was happening. So when we are discussing the issue right now, again, the question is, again, the same question is there. So who is the leader of the movement? What will SKM, that we call Samyukt Kisan Morcha, do in the upcoming election in Punjab and in Uttar Pradesh? So what kind of politics they'll be doing during the election and after the election? So this kind of questions remained with the movement, about the movement, and the questions are important and they remained almost unanswered, or I can say that there's no convincing answer to all these questions. So when the movement started from Punjab, it was the COVID time, and the people who read the first draft of these 3 laws which were being forced on us as ordinances, so they started talking and they were looking for documents. And then the first protest they organized, it was on the rooftops in 11 districts of Punjab. So that was the first call. And as a journalist, I was just thrilled that they can give such kind of call, that let's protest over the rooftops. And the first press note came which stated that the movement, the protest happened in 557 villages. That's a huge number. Just to give you the context, that Punjab has more than 12,000 villages. So most of these 557 villages are in Malwa. So at that time, the immediate question was that what can happen now? What is happening before that? So there are 2 things: the future of the movement and the momentum they are coming with. So there were 2 kind of momentums which was already there. So the immediate momentum was that most of the farmer unions who were involved in the movement, they were quite active in COVID relief things. So as the farmer movements come from rural Punjab, but the relief was happening at urban spaces. So bringing relief material from rural areas to urban spaces and distributing among the migrants, among the poor, among the industrial workers, and whosoever was in need of the material, relief material. I think it was happening all over India, wherever people could help each other. So that kind of solidarity and that kind of momentum was very much there. And before that, before the COVID, what were these farmer unions doing in Punjab? So all these farmer unions were very active in movement against CA, NRC, NPR. So as a journalist, I was posted in Delhi as I was working with BBC. So I am witness of what happened in Delhi at different places. I've forgotten the name of that very place which that moment is famous for. So what as most of the media was focusing on Delhi and Shaheen Bagh, the movement in Punjab was much bigger in scale. So the participant of people in that movement was quite big. And in February 2019, yeah, it was 2019, 20. So in February 20, there was huge rally in Malerkotla. Malerkotla is Punjab's only Muslim majority city. So the rally was of more than 50,000 people, and the rally was organized by farmer unions. So the farmer unions were quite active. I was interested in understanding why are they so active in this movement, what is behind that. So there were a lot of things. So the two aspects of the state which were very much visible through CAA, NRC, NPR. One, that it's a right-wing government which is taking the right-wing agenda forward. Two, and it is a government which has a politics which has the centralization in the center. So it is a government which is looking to strengthen the center and ignore the states and trample the rights of the states. So that was very much there. And there are other contexts of this movement too, as most of the people who were active in the movement, they were involved in different kind of movements. And we can well assume, as we all are aware of all those movements happening in India, whether it was abrogation of Article 370, or it was CAA, NRC, NPR, or other movements like the labor reforms and others. So most of those movements either failed or got crushed or got defamed over the period of time. And in that context, this movement was coming during COVID times. So at that time, it was not expected that it can be that big. But all the work which was done by the earlier movement got mobilized into this movement in Punjab. And that's what it strengthened the movement as a whole. And so then it reached there. And then I will come back to the question that who are the leaders? Why the movement is a leaderless? So in Punjab, at that time, there were more than 30 organizations, and there was a coordination committee, a very loose kind of coordination committee of 31 organizations. And then there were 2 organizations which were outside that coordination committee, but they were coordinating with it. So that kind of coordination was there. So that coordination, can you please mute? Hello. Can the organizers?
All of you
people
can, yeah, I think.
Both has to mute the mic.
I think organizers can mute. Yeah. Okay. So coming back to my point. Yeah. So coming back to my point. So these many organizations. So why was the question again was that the movement is leadership. There are so many organizations, and this question was not just coming from the journalists or from the supporters. This question was coming from the government too. That for us, it is quite difficult to deal with so many people. So there are 40 in number. And if you can form a committee of 5 people, or if you can form a committee of 3 people, then it will be quite easy to deal it with. So here the question comes, why there are 40 organizations? So they have a history. So these organizations, they may sound similar. They may sound representing the similar kind of population or similar kind of people, but actually they are not. So there are organizations which are very much casteist, and there are organizations which are against the caste. There are organizations which are very much a kind of right wing. When I say right wing, it is not the Hindutva right wing, it is the Punjab kind of right wing. It is a bit different, but it is right wing. And then there are left wing organizations. And then there are organizations which are very much committed to the social justice. And then there are organizations which has nothing to do with social justice of any kind. And then there are organizations which are committed to gender justice, and then there are organizations which has nothing to do with the gender justice. So this is a wide spectrum of people, and they can't work together. Let it be very straight. So it has been raised again and again that they can't, why don't they work together? So the issue is, with this kind of understanding, with this kind of ideological backgrounds, they can't work together. It's not at all possible for them to work together. That's why the questions which were that's why the questions which were very much there right in the beginning are still there at this moment. So what happened during this time, that they worked collectively and they faced an opposition which was considered to be an invincible kind of opposition, led by Narendra Modi, led by BJP. So what happened during that time? I think that is something unprecedented, which we need to explain to ourselves to understand what it is all about. I'm not in a capacity to say that I understand what, to comprehend what this movement is about.
There are, I think, deliberate attempts by some to disturb.
But I think you can.
Abha, will you please mute people?
Yeah.
Muting them, but when they are entering, they are not on mute. So that's why this problem is coming up. People who are entering late I'm on the lookout and I'm muting everybody at the earliest possible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So what happened during this time? I think that is the only important question which will answer a lot of our questions about the movement. So I'll just offer some of the insights which I think that are important to move ahead to understand what this movement was all about. So one of the important thing is, then I'll cite something from the office I was working with. So one of the people who was saying it again and again that this movement is leaderless. So they were the supporters of the movement who were saying it. And simultaneously in India, the movement, in India, there is a discussion about democracy, that there is a leader who is not taking the advice of his own colleagues, who is not consulting the ministers. So this is not democracy. So we need to restore democracy. That is one of the questions we are facing these days. So same people who were contesting the strong leader that this is not democracy were asking, where is the leader from the movement? I think that is something which we need to think about. So when there was pressure on the movement by these kind of sympathetic people and by the government that can you form a committee of 5 people? Can you form a committee of 3 people so that we can negotiate with it? This movement decided not to form a committee. So it was not a decision. It was a compulsion. As I said, that they are the people who can't work together. So they were in no capacity to nominate 5, 3, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 people to represent the 40. It was not at all possible for them. I think this compulsion made this movement important, as despite the ideological differences and despite coming with different kind of aspirations, they were united on one point, that was repeal the 3 laws. So the single point demand kept them united. So they were in no capacity to withdraw. So there were moments during this movement when there were people who were ready to compromise, who were ready to say that, okay, you repeal 1 law, you suspend 2, you suspend it for 3 years. So we are okay with it. But simultaneously, so it was a different kind of pull and pressure of those 40 people working together who don't like each other, who don't like each other's politics. And it doesn't mean that there are not many people who like each other. So there are people who like each other. That's why at times the decisions were taken with the number of that 12 people are on this side and 18 are on that side, 15 are on this side and 17 are on that side. So this kind of decision happened during this movement. But the issue that these diverse kind of people coming together created this movement, and that's what democracy is all about. So I assume that we need to celebrate this movement as a successful democratic experiment where there was no leader, where there was no one who could say that I'm the decision maker. Although there are people who can claim that I represent the largest organization, I'm the senior most people, so I was the chief negotiator, so I was talking the most in the meeting. So this kind of claim can be there, but let it be very clear that as far as the Samyukt Kisan Morcha is concerned, there was no leader or no one organization which was leading it. When I'm saying it, I want to bring another point into the discussion, and that point is that there are people who are constantly saying one argument is that this is a leaderless movement, which it is not, but we just need to acknowledge the diversity of people who are leaders. And then the other point of argument, it is that this is not a leader-led or a organization-led movement. It is a cadre-led organization. So this is again a similar kind of anxiety which is coming forward, which is asking the movement to be in the formula that we, the urban, educated, the journalists, the academicians are familiar with. So this movement refused to get into all those kind of templates. I think that is the greatest achievement of this movement. And another point which I want to make is the unprecedented happened during this time, but the Kisan movement in Punjab is very strong for last more than 20 years. So during these 20 years, they have tasted this unprecedentedness in different moments at different places. Let me cite an example. For example, there was an apprehension that there is a fault line between Punjab and Haryana. Once the people from Punjab will enter Haryana to go towards Delhi, there will be tension between people. So it will be Punjab Haryana tension, it will be linguistic tension, it will be Hindu Sikh tension, and it will be a tension on issues like SYL. So this apprehension was very much there, and this apprehension is very much rooted in the history of Punjab and Haryana. But the organizations which are working along the borders of Punjab and Haryana, whether they are from Haryana or they are from Punjab, they have the experience of coordinating with each other. So whenever there is a marketing issue in Punjab's border area or Haryana's border area, they help each other in selling the agriculture produce in other state. And simultaneously, whenever there is an agitation in Punjab or in Haryana on the border areas, so you'll find people from across the border participating on those movements. I have seen people of Haryana coming to Punjab and saying, Jat, हम आपके भाई हैं, जरूरत पड़ेगी तो हम सबसे पहले आएंगे. So it happened when a farmer leader was killed by commission agents in a border belt of Haryana. So there was Ghansi Ram Nayan. He was one of the big leaders. He came along with his supporters, and I can still feel the anger he came with, that a farmer leader has been killed in Punjab. So the pain, the anger, I can still feel that. So that kind of solidarity these organizations had tasted before. So they brought it together. And then there are other instances like in Punjab, there were issues of special economic zones. When organizations fought against special economic zones, they got the compensation increased or got the contracts cancelled. So they had that kind of experience that the government can withdraw, the law can be repealed. So that kind of experience they had, but not at this kind of scale. And this was really unprecedented in many ways, but they had always aspired for this kind of solidarity between Punjab and Haryana, whether these were the organizations from Punjab or they were from Haryana. So it was a right wing of both sides, whether it was Sikh right wing or it was the Hindu right wing, which was surprised by the solidarities that Punjab and Haryana forged, displayed, and remained committed with during this protest. So BJP tried its level best to promote Haryana people to ask Punjabis about the SYL and other issues. But I know people who were committed BJP people. I know journalists who were very much sympathetic towards BJP, but they refused. They said that we are not going to ask this question at this point of time. We'll keep this question for some other day. So that way, for Punjab and Haryana, it is such a fantastic exercise of people-to-people interaction that all the fault lines drawn through discourses over the period of time disappeared and people could understand each other. So Punjab and Haryana got bifurcated into two states, and rather there were three states, Punjab, Haryana and Himachal, and the language was the main issue at that time. And let me tell you, as a Punjabi, I'm sharing it with you that I have talked to a lot of people in Haryana and they learned Punjabi during this time. And many Punjabis started speaking Haryanvi. So this is what they claim. But the issue is, it need to be understood in some other way. So it is not that they learned the language during this time. It is this time when they gathered the courage and when they found that speaking Punjabi or speaking Haryanvi is speaking your own language. So they just understood that. Otherwise, as Punjabi and Haryanvi, they are very similar kind of languages. So if you say the trait of both the languages, whether it is Haryanvi or it is Punjabi, the trait is same. The formal is a bit different. So they were familiar with the languages, and this time they found the fun in speaking the language, as they found someone whom they feel like speaking the language. So this new founded love for the language and this new found a kind of a new kind of learning is something which Punjab and Haryana are never going to forget. So now I'll come back to the first question which I started with. Right now, there are organizations in Punjab who are contesting elections, and there are organizations who are not contesting election. So they are putting their arguments forward why they should be contesting election and why there is a possibility of winning the election. And then the organizations who are not contesting the election, they are putting their argument forward that their role is in the politics of protests. So they can keep the pressure on the government, whosoever forms the government, but they have a role to play. So the farmer unions will be respected by the government, whosoever forms the government. So this kind of ideological diversity is there, and this kind of positioning is there. But there are some arguments which are there. Whosoever, whether they are contesting election or they are not contesting election or they are calling for the boycott of the election. So there are two important points which all of them agree upon. Like they agreed upon repealing the laws, and those 2 points are that corporate and fascism need to be opposed. I think this is the most important achievement of the movement, that it has made this realization widespread that corporations and the right wing, they work hand in hand, and they are anti-people, and they need to be fought against. And then the second thing is that these organizations, whatever their position is, they have realized that the farm laws that they got repealed were not rooted in the local politics only. So they are rooted in the international politics, which we need to contest. And now they are thinking that how can we be part of those larger movements? And I think these are the positive things which this movement have given to all of us. With this, I thank you all. And if there is any question, I'd like to respond to that.
Thank you, Daljit ji. It was a very nuanced understanding. In fact, micro aspects of this movement you brought out very well, and the dilemmas, and also how it was possible to forge this unity in spite of all this diversity and differences. I now will take up the questions at the end, I think, for all the speakers together. I invite Jagmati Sangwan ji, whom as an inspirational speaker, I have been personally being inspired by her work, and for a very long time. She is, in fact, as you know, that a lot of you, that she is also, for the first and foremost, a sports person. She was a volleyball player who was part of the Indian team, which won the bronze in Asian Volleyball Championships long time back. And then she has been an instructor. But we know her as an activist of tremendous inspiration. She was a mighty force against the CARP in her work against what are known as honor killings, murder, and against various other kind of forcible annulling of marriages and caste and marriage, and all these issues, including gender issues in the Haryana CARPs. She was absolutely a terror to them, to those CARP leaders, going there personally, which has inspired so many of us. We've heard her, and I think I have heard some of the most clear ways of putting the issues. And in this particular movement, she was the face of, led as you know, millions of women who came to this movement, and this is a very, very inspiring part of this movement. So many women took part, and so many men did also, by cooking, doing things, did work which normally women do. Okay, so that's also another very important part, and the whole area of how much, you know, this townships were set up inside, and which was entirely through voluntary labor of people. This was maintained. And I invite Jagmati ji now to throw light on all this and inspire us.
सौम्यजीत और साथियों, ये जो फार्मर्स मूवमेंट में इतनी बड़ी महिलाओं की भागीदारी रही और अनेक तरीके से अनेक रूप में, जिसके बारे में अभी सौम्यजीत ने भी रेफर किया, मुझे ये लगता है कि ये बहुत ही सभी के द्वारा बहुत आशा भरी नजरों से देखी गई उनकी ये पार्टिसिपेशन, और सभी लोग उसको समझना भी चाहते हैं कि किस तरह से एक बिल्कुल पैट्रियार्कल स्टेट और रीजन, ये जो इधर का, और उसमें फिर कास्ट पंचायत और ये सब होते हुए भी उनकी आंदोलन में ऐसी बढ़ी चढ़ी भागीदारी जो है, ये सब के लिए एक जानने का विषय है। और मुझे ये लगता है कि ये कैसे, क्यों और कैसे कैसे ये महिलाओं की भागीदारी इस आंदोलन के अंदर रही है, इसको प्रॉपर पर्सपेक्टिव में समझने के लिए मुझे ये लगता है कि महिलाओं का जो रिश्ता है खेती बाड़ी के साथ, एग्रीकल्चर के साथ, थोड़ा सा हमें वहां से भी चीजों को देखना पड़ेगा, ताकि इस भागीदारी को हम सही जगह पे लोकेट कर सकें। और उसमें जो मैं बातचीत रखूंगी, निश्चित रूप से वो कोई रिसर्च बेस्ड उस तरह का बातचीत नहीं है, ऑब्जर्वेशंस और लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस, क्योंकि हम भी उन परिवारों से आते हैं और अभी भी क्लोज रिश्ता है, और फिर उसके साथ इस आंदोलन में जो भागीदारी रही, वो उसके आधार पे कुछ पॉइंट्स मैं रखना चाहूंगी। और जैसा कि मैंने कहा कि हम पढ़ते भी आए हैं और देखते भी आए हैं कि महिलाओं का जो खेती बाड़ी के साथ रिश्ता रहा है, वो ये है कि सबसे पहले किसान जो धरती पे थी वो महिला थी एक तरह से, वो हमने पढ़ा है पूरा। और वो जो उसका जो रिश्ता है इस खेती बाड़ी के साथ, उसकी अपनी लोकेशन जो सोसाइटी के अंदर है, तो उसमें एक तरह से बिल्कुल एक खेती बाड़ी अच्छी है तो वो भी अच्छी है, खेती बाड़ी खराब है तो वो भी मतलब उदास है। सारा उस तरह का जीने मरने का जो रिश्ता एक होता है वो उसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ महिलाओं का रहा है। लेकिन आजादी के आंदोलन के बाद जिस तरह के जो सपने देखे थे लोगों ने कि धन और धरती बट के रहेगी, रात अंधेरी कट के रहेगी, और लैंड रिफॉर्म्स का, और उसके आधार पर जो सोशल इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं उसमें बदलाव की जो अपेक्षाएं थी, वो हुई नहीं। और हमेशा से जो बड़ा तबका है किसानी का, मतलब जो छोटी जोत के जो किसान हैं जिनकी लैंड होल्डिंग छोटी रही है, मीडियम और मार्जिनल फार्मर्स, हमेशा ही उनके घरों के अंदर एक तरह का संकट जो है वो बहुत व्याप्त रहा है। और जो ये एग्रीकल्चर का संकट है, इसकी सबसे बड़ी जो कीमत अदा करी है वो महिलाओं ने करी है। असल में वो अपने मतलब उनके शरीरों के अंदर से, उनके दिलों के अंदर से होके गुजरा है ये सारा जो संकट है। चाहे वो ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन से पहले का देखें खेती बाड़ी के अंदर, या ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन के बाद भी जब बेरोजगारी शुरू होती है, या फिर 90 के बाद जो न्यू इकोनॉमिक रेजीम के तहत जो खेती बाड़ी को नॉन प्राइवेट सेक्टर की तरफ धकेला गया है, उसके बाद का। और उसमें जो आमतौर पे हमारे इस रीजन के अंदर जो रेजिस्टेंस जो फार्मर्स की तरफ से जिस तरह की ऊपर की तरफ देखी जानी चाहिए स्टेट के खिलाफ, पॉलिसीज के खिलाफ, उसकी बजाय ज्यादातर हमने ये देखा है कि वो रेजिस्टेंस जो है वो अपने से कमजोर की तरफ इस संकट को धकेलने की प्रवृत्ति जो है वो उसके अंदर बहुत ज्यादा हावी रही है। और महिलाओं के संदर्भ में देखें या दलितों के संदर्भ में देखें, महिलाओं को हालांकि 1955 के बाद लैंड राइट्स जो मिले, वो मतलब अभी भी आज के दिन भी 13% एंटाइटलमेंट है उनके पास टोटल लैंड की, और उसमें से कंट्रोल देखे तो वो तो 3-4% के पास होगा इफेक्टिव कंट्रोल जो उस लैंड का है। लेकिन वो भी उनके संदर्भ में यहाँ पे, चाहे वो स्टेट हो, चाहे वो फैमिली लेवल पे हो, सोसाइटल लेवल पे हो, उसके प्रति भी बहुत ज्यादा मतलब एक इंटॉलरेंस रही। और खुद हरियाणा की असेंबली के अंदर 2 बार तो महिलाओं की ये जो लैंड एंटाइटलमेंट है, इसको खत्म करने के लिए 2 बार यूनानिमसली रिजोल्यूशन पास करके भेजे गए राष्ट्रपति के पास, लेकिन वहां से उसको स्वीकृति नहीं मिली। तीसरी बार भी जब हमारे यहाँ से जो उप प्रधानमंत्री थे, तो सेंटर लेवल पे भी इस तरह के मूव्स किए गए। तब तक थोड़ा महिला आंदोलन जो है वो अस्तित्व में आ चुका था, तो वो विथड्रॉ करना पड़ा उनको, वो जो खत्म करने वाली जो पहल थी। इसी तरह से जो दलित जो हैं, दलितों के मतलब जो राइट्स हैं थोड़े बहुत भी, जिस तरह से ये खेती बाड़ी के अंदर संकट बढ़ने लगा, रोजगार के सवाल सामने आने लगे, और उन्होंने दिहाड़ी मजदूरी के अपने सवाल आगे उठाने शुरू किए, तो बंदियां लगा देना गांव के अंदर कि वो खेत के अंदर नहीं जाने देंगे, अगर इतने पैसे मांगेंगे तो पूरा उनकी मतलब मतलब जीवन चर्या जो है वो एक तरह से उस प्रभावित होती थी उससे। तो ये जो रेजिस्टेंस का जो इस तरह का स्वरूप रहा, इसमें मतलब हमें ये लगता है कि हो सकता है इसका लिंक, पॉसिबल लिंक यहाँ से भी हो सकता है कि 1857 के अंदर जो यहाँ पे इसी तरह के जो लैंड को लेके जिस तरह के काले कानून लेके आई थी उस समय की सरकार, उनके ऊपर जो लैंड टैक्स जो बढ़ाने वाले, उसका प्रतिरोध जो हुआ और उस प्रतिरोध को जिस तरह से क्रश किया गया एक बहुत ही निर्ममता के साथ यहाँ पे, और उसके बाद कल्चरल लेवल पे यहाँ पे जो कहावतें हैं कि राज की अगाड़ी और घोड़े की पछाड़ी नहीं जाना चाहिए, इस तरह की जो वैल्यूज जो है वो यहाँ पे काफी उसके बाद बनी। शायद ये हो सकता है उसका एक पॉसिबल रीजन। लेकिन ये जो महिलाएं हैं, ये क्योंकि ग्रीन रिवॉल्यूशन के बाद जिस तरह से फिर रोजगार के लिए दूसरे सेक्टर्स की तरफ देखना पड़ा और माइग्रेशन भी हुआ, तो वो माइग्रेशन भी आदमियों का ज्यादा हुआ, और रोजगार के क्योंकि उनके पास स्किल्स थी तो मौके भी उन्हीं को ज्यादा मिले उस तरह से। तो उस समय भी फिर इन्होंने जो गांव के अंदर अपने बच्चों को, जब और जगह पे रोजगार नहीं है और खेती बाड़ी में फ्रेगमेंटेशन की वजह से छोटी लैंड होल्डिंग होने के बाद जिस तरह से उसके ऊपर बजट की इन्वेस्टमेंट्स कट की गई हैं, तो जो रोजगार के संकट हल नहीं हुए, तो जिस तरह नशा और सारा अपराधीकरण यहाँ पे हुआ है यूथ का, और महिलाओं के लिए एक तरह से वायलेंस और इनसिक्योरिटी, तो ये जब जो सब गुजरा है प्रॉपर लैंड रिफॉर्म्स और सोशियो कल्चरल और इकोनॉमिक चेंज ना होने की वजह से खेती बाड़ी के हिसाब से इसकी सबसे बड़ी गवाह जो है वो महिलाएं हैं। सबसे बड़ा लोड उन्होंने उठाया है इस संकट का, और सबसे ज्यादा वायलेंस घरेलू स्तर पे, बाहर के स्तर पे उन्होंने झेली है। लेकिन जिस तरह का यहाँ पे पैट्रियार्कल सेटअप है, उसमें डिसीजन मेकिंग में उनकी किसी तरह की से नहीं, और किसी भी आंदोलन के साथ या किसी भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के साथ वो अपनी मर्जी से कोई संबंध नहीं बना सकती उस तरह से। तो ये एक अक्यूमुलेटेड एंगर जो उनके अंदर था, और जिसको इस फार्मर्स मूवमेंट के साथ जो है, जब उनको पूरी इजाजत दी गई आंदोलन के साथ जुड़ने की, उसमें भागीदारी करने की, तो एक तरह से ये जो अक्यूमुलेटेड एंगर है और जो चर्निंग उनके अंदर चल रही थी, वो उसको जैसे एक ठहरे हुए पानी को एक बांध हटा दे तो जिस तरह से वो जाता है आगे एक साथ जो है, उस तरह से ये महिलाओं ने इस मौके को लिया। कि हाँ ये मौका है जहाँ पे हम अपनी बात कह सकते हैं और अपने गुस्से को भी सुना सकते हैं दुनिया को जो है। तो ये इसकी वजह से इतनी बड़ी संख्या में इनकी भागीदारी हुई। और निश्चित रूप से पहले पंजाब से जो यहाँ पे जत्थे आए 26 नवंबर को दिल्ली मार्च के लिए, और वो 26 नवंबर को जो जत्थे आए थे उसके बाद जिस तरह का सलूक हरियाणा सरकार ने उनके साथ किया दमन का, और रास्ते खोद दिए, सड़कें तोड़ दी, और इतना ठंड के अंदर उनके ऊपर पानी की बौछार और ये सब जो किया गया, और उसके सामने जिस तरह से वो किसान जो उसका मुकाबला कर रहे थे, जिस स्पिरिट के साथ जो है, जिस तरह से उन्होंने बैरिकेड्स को और इन चीजों को हवा में उछाला एक तरह से, तो इसने कॉन्फिडेंस दिया उनको, उन महिलाओं को और लोगों को, हाँ कि इस लहर के अंदर एक वो ताकत है जो असल में चुनौती दे सकती है इस सरकार को। क्योंकि हरियाणा के अंदर तभी जाट आरक्षण का भी आंदोलन पिछले दौर में हुआ था 2018 में, और वो भी मतलब इस संकट से मुकाबले का एक उनका अपना तरीका जो उनकी सोच है जिस तरह की, उसकी वजह से वो था। जाहिर है कि उसका दमन हुआ बहुत, तो इतना आसान नहीं था। 26 नवंबर को जब दिल्ली चलो की कॉल दी गई थी 2020 में, तो इतना आसान नहीं था आदमियों और औरतों का निकलना हरियाणा से उस पृष्ठभूमि की वजह से। लेकिन फिर जिस तरह से वो हरियाणा के बॉर्डर्स पे आके डेरे डाले गए, दिल्ली जाने की बजाय, वो चाहे वो टिकरी पे था, चाहे वो सिंगू बॉर्डर पे था, चाहे वो इधर से पलवल और शाहजहांपुर और इन जगहों के ऊपर, तो तमाम ये हरियाणा से लगती जगह थी। तो एक तरह से सबसे पहला जो महिलाओं की और जो आंदोलन के साथ जो हमदर्दी रखने वाले लोग थे, उनकी सबसे पहली जिम्मेवारी जो बड़े पैमाने पर निभाई गई महिलाओं के द्वारा भी, वो था कि उनके लिए भोजन पानी सब कुछ जुटाना। जो जत्थे आके टेंट लगा के डेरे डाले गए वहां पे, तो पहले वहां उनके लिए सब तरह के इंतजामात एक तरह से हरियाणा से जुटाने हैं भाई। इस भावना से महिलाएं जो हैं बहुत उन्होंने गांव के अंदर काम किया, और निश्चित रूप से जो पहली जो लेयर थी जो सक्रिय हुई आंदोलन के अंदर महिलाओं की, जो वो थी जो थोड़ा सचेत महिलाएं थी, जिनका ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल कोई कॉन्शियसनेस का लेवल था, चेतना का लेवल था कि किस तरह से फूड सिक्योरिटी का सवाल जो है वो इन 3 काले कानूनों के साथ जुड़ा हुआ है, और किस तरह से मतलब उनके रोजगार जो बचे खुचे हैं वो भी चले जाएंगे, और जितनी भी मतलब ICDS का और ये सब जो योजनाएं हैं उनके लिए वो किस तरह से खत्म होंगी। और साथ साथ में CAA NRC के आंदोलन के दौरान जिस तरह से महिलाएं मतलब डट के लड़ी थी सड़कों के ऊपर, ये सारा जो था वो एक लेयर जो पहली थी वो उन महिलाओं की थी जो सबसे पहले सक्रिय हुई, और फिर गांव गांव में जाके मीटिंगें की गई, और आदमी लोग जो हैं वो खुद लेकर जाते थे हम लोगों को साथ में लेके। पहले तो जब हम मीटिंग करने जाते थे महिलाओं की, तो कहते थे कि ये तो घर तुड़वाएंगी ये जो महिला समिति वाली है, और इस दौरान जो है वो आदमी हमें कहते थे कि हमारे यहाँ पे आके मीटिंग करो जी, हमारे यहाँ की महिलाएं जो है उनको निकाल लो एक बार। तो वो खुद उनको बहुत मोटिवेट कर रहे थे भाग लेने के लिए। और फिर ये जो फर्स्ट टाइमर महिलाएं जिस तरह से सक्रिय हुई इसके अंदर, तो उसमें फिर वो गीत भी गा रही हैं, वो नारे भी लगा रही हैं, वो भाषण भी दे रही हैं, तमाम तरह की स्किल्स, ट्रैक्टर चला के वो वहां पे आ रही हैं, और आदमी जब वहां पे गए हुए हैं तो खेती बाड़ी का काम, पशुओं का, बुजुर्गों का सारा संभाल के भी वो खुद जो है खुशी खुशी से फिर शामिल होती थी, जो स्थानीय स्तर पे भी यहाँ पे आंदोलन चल रहे थे। तो अनेकों तरह से उन्होंने इस आंदोलन के अंदर भूमिका निभाई। इसमें नौजवान लड़कियां भी उन्होंने अपनी स्किल्स का भरपूर, जैसे मीडिया, लीगल एड और दूसरे जो कल्चरल और लाइब्रेरी चलाना, ये सब अखबार जो निकाले गए, ट्रॉली टाइम्स या करती धरती, वो नौजवान लड़कियों की स्किल्स, उनके इनिशिएटिव्स जो है बहुत ज्यादा इसमें रहे हैं। और साथ में दलित महिलाएं भी जो हैं फूड सिक्योरिटी के सवाल को जहाँ पे प्रॉपर पर्सपेक्टिव के साथ खोला गया, इन 3 काले कानूनों से जुड़े हुए होने की वजह से, ऑल्दो सरकार की तरफ से तमाम तरह का दुष्प्रचार किया गया कि जो लैंडलेस कम्युनिटीज हैं वो इस आंदोलन के साथ ना जुड़े, और ये दिखाया गया कि आज तक ये किसान तुम्हारा दमन करते आए हैं और तुम्हारे ऊपर अत्याचार करते आए हैं। परंतु फिर भी जहाँ पे सही पर्सपेक्टिव के साथ विमर्श हुआ तो वहां पे वो भागीदारी हुई, और धीरे धीरे वो बढ़ी भी, वो जो भागीदारी है। और ऐसा मतलब जो ये भागीदारी थी, उसके बाद एसकेएम के द्वारा जो किसान दिवस मनाया गया 18 जनवरी को, और उसके बाद 8 मार्च अंतर्राष्ट्रीय महिला दिवस मनाया गया। फिर संसद में उनकी भागीदारी जिस तरह से करवाई गई, वो उनकी संख्या को देखते हुए एसकेएम के द्वारा लिए गए बहुत ही उपयुक्त फैसले थे। और इन फैसलों के बाद तो महिलाओं के अंदर एक इस तरह की भावना जो है, क्योंकि वो मतलब हर हाल में चाहती थी कि इनके खेती बाड़ी के संकट का समाधान जो है वो होना ही चाहिए। तो और अब ये आंदोलन जो है, ये भरोसेमंद आंदोलन जो है, ये अस्तित्व में आया है। तो वो मतलब ऐसी भावना एक स्तर पे उनके अंदर आई हुई थी कि जिस तरह से आजादी के आंदोलन में बापू गांधी अगर कॉल दें कि सारे गहने भी आंदोलन के लिए दे दें, तो महिलाएं वो तक करने को तैयार थी यहाँ पे कि कोई भी नौबत ऐसी आए तो हम मतलब सब कुछ कर सकते हैं, पर आंदोलन को हर हाल में जीतना चाहिए। ऐसी भावना उनके अंदर थी। और सब बॉर्डर्स पे परिवार भी जो आंदोलन में नहीं भी थे वो देखने जाते थे, और ऐसी स्थिति थी यहाँ पे आपस में लोग जब बात करते थे कि बॉर्डर पे जाके आए हैं, नहीं जाके आए, नहीं जाके आए, तो मतलब जैसे लाहौर नहीं वेख्या, वो जो अपना एक वो नाटक में दिखाया गया है ना, वो जम्या ही नहीं। तो ऐसा अस्सी फीलिंग थी कि जो नहीं जा पाए, तो लगता है कि हर परिवार जो है वो अपने बच्चों के साथ, अपने महिलाओं के साथ जो है वहां पे गए हैं। और तमाम जो फेस्टिवल्स हैं, फेस्टिवल्स को भी महिलाओं ने इस आंदोलन की तरह से बदलते हुए उनके मैसेज को वो मनाया एक तरह से, और उन फेस्टिवल्स के दिन भागीदारी और भी ज्यादा बढ़ती थी जो महिलाओं की और आम लोगों की वहां पे। लेकिन इसके साथ साथ ये भी मैं कहना चाहूंगी कि ऐसा नहीं है कि वहां पे आंदोलन की जगह पे और आंदोलन के अंदर कोई पैट्रियार्कल माइंडसेट नहीं था। उसके खिलाफ भी असर्शन जो है वो महिलाएं लगातार कर रही थी। जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल शुरू में जब स्टेज पर बैठते थे तो ये ऐसा था कि महिलाएं जो है वो भाषण देके और नीचे बैठो, और स्टेज के ऊपर आदमी आदमी बैठेंगे, मतलब तो बहुत बार हमें कन्फ्रंट करना पड़ा इस बात को कि क्यों महिलाएं क्यों नीचे बैठेंगी ऐसे। तो तब जाके मतलब कुछ सुधार हुए उसके अंदर। और इसी तरह से फिर ऐसी परिस्थितियां भी आई कि जिस तरह से महिलाओं को सेक्स ऑब्जेक्ट की तरह से देखने वाली नजर अगर आप आंदोलन में है तो वो एकदम खत्म तो नहीं हो जाती है। तो सेक्सुअल हरासमेंट के केसेस भी जो हैं वहां पे आए, परंतु क्योंकि जो विमेन ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस है जिन्होंने सपोर्ट किया था आंदोलन को, और खास तौर पे जब बंगाली युवती जो आंदोलन को सपोर्ट करने के लिए यहाँ पे आई थी, उसके साथ रेप की घटना और उसके अनफॉर्चुनेट मतलब डेथ भी हुई उस नौजवान लड़की की जो है, उसके बाद तो हरियाणा के मुख्यमंत्री ने बिल्कुल ऐसा तमाम तरह के तो दुष्प्रचार वो करते ही रहे थे, आतंकवादी हैं और ये खालिस्तानी हैं, ये फिर उन्होंने बोलना शुरू किया कि ये तो सब मतलब यहाँ पे मुर्गे खाते हैं, शराब पीते हैं और बहन बेटियों की इज्जत लूटते हैं, इज्जत के साथ खिलवाड़ करते हैं। इस तरह के सवाल भी उन्होंने उठाए। तो वहां पे विमेन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने बहुत असर्टिवली एसकेएम के ऊपर ये दबाव बनाया कि वो जो है एंटी सेक्सुअल हरेसमेंट कमेटीज जो है वो बॉर्डर्स के ऊपर गठित करे। अनेक उन बातचीत में हमने ये बात जो है वो खूब इफेक्टिवली रखनी पड़ी अलग अलग स्तर पे। उसके बाद शुरुआत यहाँ से हुई कि AIKSCC जो है उन्होंने नेशनल लेवल पे एक कमेटी बनाई, एंटी सेक्सुअल हरेसमेंट कमेटी जो है वो एसकेएम ने नहीं बनाई थी, वो पहले AIKSCC ने बनाई। वो महिला जब एसकेएम को मतलब उस स्थिति को हैंडल करने का एक तरह से कुछ सूझ नहीं रहा था, तो ये जो विमेन ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस है इन्होंने असर्ट करते हुए ये सारा करके रास्ता निकाला और उसके बाद अलग अलग बॉर्डर्स के ऊपर एसकेएम ने जो है कमेटियां बनाई। और उसके बाद हमने ये देखा कि जो राइट टू प्रोटेस्ट है, राइट टू प्रोटेस्ट जो महिलाओं के संदर्भ में अभी तक मतलब ऐसे देखा जाता था कि कोई मतलब इज्जत से देखने की नजर वहां पे, या उनके जो विशेष जरूरतें हैं जैसे टॉयलेट्स की है, बहुत ही नहाने की है, मतलब वहां पे इतने लंबे समय तक जब आपको रहना है, तो ये जो विशिष्ट जरूरतें जो हैं इनकी कोई पहले उस तरह से पहचान उतनी ज्यादा नहीं थी। और जब ये कमेटियां सक्रिय हुई, एसकेएम के साथ लगातार संवाद भी चलता था, तो उसके बाद ये सारे इंतजाम किए गए। और यहाँ पे तो हरियाणा में तो यहाँ तक देखने को मिला कि जो प्रोटेस्ट करने वाली महिलाएं हैं उनके खिलाफ खुद बीजेपी का जब सामाजिक बहिष्कार चल रहा था लोकल स्ट्रेटजीज के माध्यम से, तो वो बहिष्कार के समय पे वो यूनिवर्सिटी कैंपसेस के ऊपर अपनी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी की मीटिंग करते थे बीजेपी की, तो वहां पे काले झंडे महिलाएं दिखाने गई हुई थी। तो गाड़ी में बैठे हुए फॉर्मर मिनिस्टर ब्लू आइड बॉय ऑफ बीजेपी और एक MLA उन्होंने उनकी तरफ अश्लील इशारे किए, तो पूरा जो जत्था था वहीं से वो अश्लील इशारे जब करके निकली वो गाड़ी, तो ये डिसाइड किया गया कि उस MLA के घर पे अब सीधे जाएंगे और उनसे माफी मंगवाएंगे कि महिलाओं के प्रति इस तरह का कैसे हिमाकत कैसे कर सकते हैं आप। तो उस MLA ने तो माफी मांग ली, परंतु रोहतक से जो फॉर्मर मिनिस्टर था वो पूरा बीजेपी को मतलब ये जो अजय मिश्रा जो यूपी वाला मिनिस्टर जैसा ऐसा वो कैरेक्टर है यहाँ की पॉलिटिक्स में, उसने कहा कि वो माफी नहीं मांगेगा। तो वो ही जत्थे जो हैं वो इकट्ठे होके उसके घर के सामने डेरे डाल दिए, दिन रात का धरना चला। जून जुलाई के उसमें मतलब गर्मी और बारिश और दिन रात महिलाएं जो है 90 साल से लेके और नौजवान लड़कियां सब हम सड़कों पे सोए। और हम जब महिलाओं को कहते थे कि जो बुजुर्ग थी उनको कहते हम कि आपको हम मतलब वहां पे घर पे सुला सकते हैं, हम यहाँ पे सोएंगे, तो वो बिल्कुल ऐसे बोलती थी कि ना घर पे सोना होता तो हम घर ही ना रहते, यहाँ किस लिए आते, हम तो यहीं सोएंगे इसके मतलब दरबार के ऊपर। और वहां पे जैसे पूरा टॉयलेट्स बंद कर दिए गए और सब कुछ ऐसी परिस्थितियां प्रशासन की तरफ से बनाई गई। परंतु 5 दिन बाद फिर वहां महिला न्याय महापंचायत का फैसला किया गया कि हम यहाँ पे वो करेंगे, एसकेएम की लीडरशिप आएगी, विमेन ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस की लीडरशिप आएंगी, सब आएंगे यहाँ पे। वो जब दबाव बना तो फिर उस मंत्री ने भी कहा कि मैं उन महिलाओं से माफी मांगना चाहता हूँ, और फिर उन्होंने पैर पकड़े उन महिलाओं के, तब जाके वो मोर्चा जो है वो खत्म हुआ यहाँ पे। तो जो एक डिग्निफाइड राइट टू प्रोटेस्ट विमेन के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जो है उसको बहुत मजबूती दी है इस आंदोलन ने। और अभी तो महिलाएं जो हैं, जैसे सेलिब्रेशंस चल रहे थे अभी जीत के बाद, तो सेलिब्रेशन में मतलब इतनी वोकल हो गई थी वो अपने हकों को लेके कि हमारे रोहतक में जब सेलिब्रेशन चल रहा था तो एक साथी ने स्टेज से अनाउंस किया कि भाई पीछे चाय रखी है, जिस भी भाई को चाय लेनी पीनी हो तो महिला ने तुरंत खड़े होके कहा कि बहनों के बारे में क्या विचार है आपका, हमें चाय नहीं चाहिए क्या? तो बिल्कुल ऐसे वो अब तमाम तरह से उनके प्रति जो भेदभावकारी नजर है उसके ऊपर भी बहुत वोकल हुई है। लेकिन मैं ये भी कहना चाहूंगी कि अभी जो फ्यूचर में उनके अंदर ये जो इनिशिएटिव, ये जो कॉन्फिडेंस और जिस तरह का रेजिस्टेंस की भावना आई है, ये सस्टेन हो उनके अंदर, इसके लिए जो किसान संगठन है, विमेन ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं, उनको बहुत सचेत कोशिशें करनी पड़ेंगी, क्योंकि इनको वापस भेजने के लिए जो पैट्रियार्कल फोर्सेस हैं वो ऑलरेडी सक्रिय हो चुकी हैं। यहाँ पे अभी ये जो 18 से 21 साल की उम्र का जो लाया गया है लड़कियों की शादी के संदर्भ में, जो सरकार की तरफ से ड्राफ्ट जो लाया गया है, उसके ऊपर जब बहस खुलने लगी है तो ये बहुत अलग तरह से ये जो बहस जो है इसने फिर से, जैसे यहाँ पे पंचायतें हैं उन्होंने फिर जैसे चॉइस मैरिज का सवाल है और इनके खिलाफ आवाजें उठानी फिर से पंचायतें करके ये शुरू की है। और उनके अंदर मतलब थोड़ा अफसोस की बात ये है कि हमारे जो एसकेएम की लीडरशिप भी शामिल हुई है उन पंचायतों के अंदर। तो उनके इस पहल कदमी को पीछे धकेलने वाली पितृसत्तात्मक और वेस्टेड इंटरेस्ट की ताकतें जो है वो सक्रिय होंगी। उस समय पे वो जो रजिस्ट करेंगी महिलाएं उनके खिलाफ, उनको बहुत क्लोज सपोर्ट की जरूरत रहेगी। अगर हम जो सचेत जो ऑर्गेनाइज्ड फोर्सेस है वो अगर सपोर्ट उनको दे पाए तो ये बहुत चेंज की बड़ी एजेंसी और बड़ी ऊर्जा जो है वो शामिल हुई है यहाँ पे। इसके अंदर वो पोटेंशियल है, जिस तरह से हमने सीए एनआरसी और इनके खिलाफ जो सारा देखा है। लेकिन अगर वो सपोर्ट नहीं होगी तो खुद इनको भी मतलब दूसरी तरफ भी इस ऊर्जा को जो है वो मोड़ा जा सकता है। ये थोड़ा सा ऐसा मुकाम है, ये मैं रखना चाह रही थी। धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद जगमती जी, आप इतना क्लियरली ये जो सारे कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी है और इतना मोमेंटस जो हुआ है, इस तरीके से महिलाओं को पार्टिसिपेशन इस मूवमेंट में एक लेवल में अनप्रेसिडेंटेड है, और इसके बारे में आप सबसे अच्छा हमें बोल सकते हैं, और जो बहुत ही संक्षिप्त टाइम में ये हमारे सामने रखे हैं। धन्यवाद। और सवाल जवाब के टाइम और उस टाइम में और क्लैरिटी आएगा इसके ऊपर। I now call upon P. Sainath, who I don't actually, it will be very insufficient whatever introduction I give. As you know, he is one of the prime Indian journalists and who has been working on particularly on rural India and agriculture, on poverty and caste discriminations, and has been from the beginning of the farmers' protests, including the huge march in Bombay and all that. He is the founder of People's Archive of Rural India, a very, very important initiative, an online platform that focuses on social and economic inequality, rural affairs, and poverty. He has been also, a lot of you know that been the author of the extremely celebrated book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which is actually achievements has been have got so many important international recognition and awards. The Brahman Magsaysay Award in 2007 for believing the journalism is for people, not for shareholders. The European Commission's Lorenzo Natali Prize for Journalism in 1995. In 2000, he had won the Amnesty International Global Human Rights Journalism Prize and the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization Award in 2001. Sainath won the Japan's most important and prestigious international awards. And before that, in fact, it is A.R. Rahman who had got it from India, and he got this, and the only journalist from India to get it. And what is most spectacular, I mean, what is the most thing about this is that the 5 million yen prize money, he is not pocketing, he is donating that, I mean, spending it on the families of and Adivasi communities. So this selfless work that he has done for years, we have all been inspired by him, mesmerized by his speeches. So many times I've heard him, and I'll just end by saying that he has also, as much as he got these awards, he has rejected every time, refused to take any award from the state, maintaining this position that the journalists, as primarily critiques of the state, shouldn't take award from the state, including Padma Bhushan was, which was offered to him in 2009. He refused to take it, and recently he has also done it to another award by, you know, the YSR award. He didn't take it, so turned down the prize. Somebody who has for so many years inspired us with his principled stand and absolutely steadfast effort, and one of the person who knows rural India backwards. With that introduction, which I think is actually very insufficient, I call upon Sainath to speak to us about this movement, which I told you he knows from the very beginning, every aspect of it.
Thank you very much, Ramajit. You know, the two speakers before me gave you very deep insights into the protests themselves and the mechanics of the protest, the construction of the protest. So I won't go too much into that, except to say that your media will never ever tell you that these were the largest peaceful democratic protests in the world organized during the pandemic. And even if we look before the pandemic, there is no bigger farmers movement across the world that I could see in a decade almost. So, and sustained it for 1 year under simply impossible circumstances. I think we should respect the kind of phenomenon we are dealing with and discussing. But both your speakers gave you such incisive presentations. I want to spend more time on the protests themselves. Very quickly, one is the laws themselves. There are three things about those laws. One, the repeal of the laws does not mean the resolution of the agrarian crisis. This is something very important to be understood. It does not mean that the laws wherein vicious, deliberate intensification of that crisis, a constructed intensification by policy. But their withdrawal, where are we? I mean, we still have the crisis to contend with. So that's one thing that we should all be very aware of. The second thing about the laws is that it is to the credit of the Kisan Andolan, it's to the credit of the country's farmers. And we were never told that by our media either. They were fighting a much bigger battle than their own personal interests. They were fighting laws that affected every single citizen in the country in more fundamental ways than you would imagine if you have not read the laws. And most people haven't. There are 4 or 5 clauses introduced into the first 2 of the laws. The Essential Commodities Act thing was really an amendment. Essentially, it said that all what you, that's about all it did. And it removed limits on stockpiling, etc., etc. But the other 2 laws have 4 or 5 clauses in them. If there's time at the end of it, I'll show them to you, share them with you. The laws removed the fundamental right of the citizen, Article 32 of the Constitution of India, the fundamental right to legal remedy. The laws place themselves completely outside the purview of the legal system, because if you look in one clause is 13, 14, and the other, I think, 17, 18, absolutely bar the jurisdiction of the civil courts. It's not just that a farmer is barred, anybody is barred. You may be an NGO, you may be an academic expert on the subject, but you are barred from any challenge to these laws under these clauses to these laws themselves. Now, what's very important is that those clauses are now being introduced in law after law since then. And they have been slipped in and been accepted, and there is no agitation over that. Let me tell you what those clauses did. One, they completely barred the jurisdiction of the civil courts. By the way, the only body that recognized this fact and protested was the Bar Council of Delhi, not notable for its bravery on a number of other occasions. But I like what they pointed out, It's important you should know. They wrote in protest to the Prime Minister and President that you're destroying the livelihood of thousands of farmers. Because if you put agriculture outside the purview, all the time the district courts will simply fold, because most of the cases there are to do with disputes that farmers have against someone, including each other. So the Delhi Bar Council recognized, they said the district courts will be devastated. There will be no work for wakils. But, at least they were able to spot the direct danger to them. But one of the clauses, as I said, bars the jurisdiction. 2, what do you do if you cannot contest the laws in court? You can go to an appellate tribunal. Who is this appellate tribunal? Yeah, it consists of, bold, impartial people like the Tehsildar, the deputy collector or sub-collector. Maybe the collector himself might sit on one of the hearings if someone very big like Reliance or Adani is involved. And these are the only people you can appeal to when you have a dispute on, say, on contract farming, on anything. These are the only people you can appeal to. Third, the law in these words bars anyone from prosecuting, it says, no suit, no prosecution shall lie. No suit, no prosecution shall lie against central government or state government or any officer of the central government or any officer of the state government or anyone acting under this law on good faith, any other persons. Now, any other persons, well, we know that Adani and Ambani are people of such good faith, right? So you cannot act against anyone under those laws. These clauses are now appearing in law after law, including the cow slaughter law, the latest outrageous law on cow slaughter in Karnataka. Not only does it prevent you from suing people, not only it's added one more rider. It's added another rider straight out of the 1870s, I think. Not only are you prohibited from suing anyone, and again, persons acting under good faith have immunity. And number two, the standards of evidence for possession or whatever are very low, and any sub-inspector, accompanied by a mob, of course, can enter your house and absolutely, you can be the next Afla Khan. But the most important addition in that law is the clause, those acting in good faith under this law will be deemed to be public servants. There is a clause somewhere in the 1870s or 1880s from the original IPC. So it's a clause for vigilantes. It's a law written for the Bajrang Dal and the VHP. Those acting under this law in good faith may be deemed to be public servants under the relevant section of the IPC that has not been invoked in 100 years, or maybe 120, 30 years, right? So this is the scary thing. There is a complete destruction of the citizens' right to legal redress. And it's not just with the farmers brought this to light with their struggle, and I think that is really something we owe them. Now, when I said that it doesn't end the agrarian crisis, what is that crisis? In 5 words, the agrarian crisis is corporate hijack of Indian agriculture. What is the process by which that is achieved? Predatory, 5 words, predatory commercialization of the countryside. And what is the outcome of that? Biggest 5 words, biggest displacement in Indian history. When the migrants started going back last year, suddenly the media realized that there were millions of migrants and that they were trying to go home. And there was this breast beating and this sense of fake guilt and fake tears. Why are they leaving? That was entirely the wrong question. The question was, why did they leave their villages to come and work as your Naukarani, your driver, your Mochi, your Mali? Why did they leave their villages in the first place? The answer to that is 2 words, agrarian crisis. Okay? Over 400,000 farmers have taken their own lives in the last 2 decades, according to the government numbers, according to the National Crime Records Bureau. At one point, this got so embarrassing. Not many of you know that the government of India in 2017 shut down the National Crime Records Bureau. It shut it down and merged it into another body called BPRD, the Bureau of Police Research and Development. And that does a few sample surveys, outsources them to private researchers maybe, whereas the NCRB is a census of all police stations in every district and taluka of the country. So it was like trying to get data was like merging the results of the general election into your favorite opinion poll. Now this hurt the government so badly, they simply could not function. It hurt them so badly because there's a lot of other data apart from farm data. So within 10 months, the government resurrected the NCRB with a new order. But it tells you how serious their problem with the numbers and the data of the crisis are. That's another point of it. Also, I want to tell you a little update which will give you an idea of what the condition of farmers are in this country. Remember, Mr. Modi made a promise, which Mr. Arun Jaitley officially articulated in January 2017. 5 साल के अंदर अंदर किसान वर्ग का इनकम जो एग्रीकल्चर से मिलते हैं इनकम वो दो गुना बढ़ाएंगे हम. Remember? Now, the latest 77th round of the National Sample Survey shows that, yes, there is a marginal increase. By the way, they give you a figure of 10,000 a month for a family of 5. It's not an individual farmer's income. 10,300 rupees, family of 5. And incidentally, in Punjab, a farm family is 5.4. In Haryana, it is 5.9. So you do the math and see what that comes to. However, once you adjust that for inflation and take the real income, it falls to 8,300 per month. And then, if you look at which sectors the farmer is getting his increase from, the increase comes, which is anyway a marginal, terribly marginal increase over the 6,426 of 2013. But a farmer gets income from 3, 4, 5 directions: agriculture and cultivation, which is where Mr. Modi made his promise. Second, the livestock. Third, wage labor. More and more farmers are turning to wage labor. Always you had millions of that, but it is a spectacular increase in the last few years. Now, the income of the farmer has gone up from wage labor, which means more and more farmers are taking up wage labor, and there is going to be some competition with agricultural workers, landless laborers. Second, there has been another increase has come from livestock. Believe it or not, the income from cultivation has actually declined. It has actually declined, both in absolute terms and in, well, that's enough, you know. This is where the farmers are at. One of the things, and you know, I wish academics would take the media much more seriously rather than dismiss it. Of course, it deserves contempt, and it does not help you to dismiss it. Nowhere did this media in a year and a half, where every slogan, every second slogan of the farmers was about Ambani and Adani, nowhere did they tell you, did the media tell you, that India's $140 billionaires had doubled their income in the first 12 months of the pandemic, in a period where the national economy contracted by 7.7%. You have seen the biggest transfer of wealth from poor to rich in living memory in independent India. From, you know, so the economy contracts, government figure is 7.7% of GDP. Independent economists and analysts have suggested that it could be much higher than that. It could be double digits. Anyway, 7.7% it contracts. Mr. Ambani's wealth goes up 129%. Mr. Adani's wealth goes up 467%. And Mr. Ambani's personal wealth, as estimated by Forbes magazine, is equal to the GDP of Punjab. Okay, it's equivalent. GDP of Punjab was $85.5 billion, that 21, and it was shrinking because of the COVID, the pandemic, the collapse. Ambani's wealth was $84.5 billion, and he had added 129% to it in a year. So by now it's clear that Ambani is ahead of Punjab. And yet, you want to know, you know, why Punjabis are irritated and why Haryanvis are agitated over it. Now, what are the things that, say, you know, in the limited time, what are the sort of things we could do? What are the sort of things we could do? If there is one lesson the Kisan Andolan has taught us, and there are negative ones too, but we don't have the time to get into that. What if there's one lesson it's taught us, it's about the sheer importance of public action. Your media are not going to fight battles for democracy. The reason the media could never say a word, you just read the editorials, the so-called underdogs paper, the Indian Express, editorial after editorial saying, you know, प्यार से बात करो किसान से, talk to them nicely, but do not repeal the laws. These are great laws. Those were their lead editorials. There were about, I think, 6 or 7 of them. And why? Number one, who is the biggest owner of media in India? Mukesh Ambani. Second, those by the way, all those television channels that you watch, ETV Hindi, ETV Marathi, ETV Gujarati, they're not owned by Enadu TV and haven't been owned by Enadu TV for more than a decade. 19 out of 24 ETV channels are owned by Mukesh Ambani. One, he's the biggest owner of the media. There is no chance of the media taking him on. Second, those media he does not own, he's the biggest advertiser alongside the government of India, on which government advertising many media outlets became doubly dependent during the pandemic and the economic collapse. Right? So there is such a glaring conflict of interest over here that the media can never tell you the truth about. It's too heavily invested in these people to be able to tell you. It is, after all, not for nothing that we call it corporate media. I don't call it mainstream media. A media that shuts out the mainstream can hardly be described as mainstream. So one of the things that's been discussed and we are discussing with farmers' movements all across the country, what voice did the farmers have? It's very correct, and I'm very proud of the kind of efforts that Trolley Times and others undertook. But it is not, it is the media of a movement. It is the organ of a protest. The everyday deluge of misinformation and disinformation through corporate media. Who's to challenge that? If you look at all the op-ed pages in the media on the farm protest, Surjit Balla, Ashok Gulati, Surjit Balla writing as India's director on the IMF, calling the farmer of Punjab rich farmers demanding socialism, okay, without mentioning that the average income of the farm household in Punjab for a strength of 5.4 was 18,050 rupees a month, which was less than 3,500 rupees per capita if you divide by 5.4, or even if you divide by 5. The same Surjit Balla, as a director on the IMF, earns more in a day than 6 of those households earn probably in a week or a month. But none of this, there's no one to challenge this. There is no one to challenge the word. And I wish academics would take this. I think the most bastardized word in recent decades is that called reforms. Who's to challenge it? I believe that Indian agriculture requires desperate reforms. But who's to reclaim that? Who's to speak and say, these are the reforms we need? Now, if you know, all of you know, throughout the country, farmers were united on one demand. If there were 2 English words they knew Swaminathan report. However, it is now 17 years since the Swaminathan report was submitted. The first thing approaching a blueprint in Indian agriculture in our history. Okay? The Swaminathan Commission was a fine commission of experts which widely consulted with farmers and others. But 17 years have passed since 2004, December, when it gave the first of its historic reports. The UPA and the NDA, both of them in turn, killed those reports and did not. There were 10 years during which the UPA was in power after the submission of the reports. It never allowed, Mr. Pawar never allowed a special discussion, not a 1 hour's dedicated discussion to the Swaminathan report. The time has come for a serious update, and don't get reports by official commissions of government or of Supreme Court. You've seen how the Supreme Court has treated its own. When they formed that committee of experts, I was requested. Mr. Justice Bobde said in open court, I think people like P. Sainath should be there. I wrote him a thank you, but no thank you. I cannot be part of a death by committee sentence. Now look, now he has even sentenced the committee to death. Right? It's gone. Let's have a Kisan commission. A Kisan commission of the most respected agrarian intellects in this country. You have a Kisan commission that updates, redoes, and goes much further than the Swaminathan Commission did. Because whatever the Swaminathan Commission did, and it was excellent, it could not critique. It could not critique 20 years of neoliberalism. It could not do that. It was an official committee of the government. And you are not going to get anywhere in your fight against the agrarian crisis if you are unable to critique the neoliberal onslaught of the last 30 years. For that, and I'm saying this time don't have a commission like the Supreme Court appoints one and shut it down. The government appoints one and won't read its reports for 20 years. Have a Kisan commission. And we are finding that the response to this idea is very positive. I've toured Punjab with it, been in Chandigarh with it, been in Andhra recently with it. It's very positive as people feel that then there is a voice that speaks for us. Remember that it is extremely important because this is the place from where all of us, academics, journalists, all progressives, can support such a thing. You can have, this body can have hearings in every taluka in the country if it chooses, because it will have state level things. It will demand a special session of parliament to discuss its report along with the Swaminathan. We are asking, in these 5 elections, we are asking governments to declare that they will hold a special session of the State Assembly on the agrarian crisis. I believe Akhilesh Yadav is open to the idea and is willing to articulate it. I think they're still finalizing their manifesto, so I don't know what will come up with, but it's there. So I'm saying this, that in a Kisan commission, it's going to need serious academic input. It's also, many of the issues of the Swaminathan Commission have gone much further. Swaminathan Commission worried about the issues of climate change. We have to be panicking by now with how far those issues have gone, how far that problem has developed, because the very future of Indian agriculture is going to have a major impact. I mean, will be impacted very majorly by climate change, already has been very significantly in peninsular India. So I think that this is what I would like to leave you with, this idea of having public action with a Kisan committee, with the people of the highest respect and regard, held in high regard across the nation, including, and we want the Kisan Andolan to own this. It has to happen with their consent, with their imagination, with their inspiration. We can really then bring out a state of the Indian agricultural nation report. And each stage of the report also gives you an opportunity for organizing, agitation, and struggle. Yeah. Thank you. I'll end it.
Thank you, Sainath, for this very inspiring talk, and also placing the entire movement in such wonderfully in the context of what is happening to laws, and it's very, very scary. And very few people know that kind of changes which are happening, where people's legal rights are being taken away. And the link that this whole thing is you placed the way you placed it, and also the way forward. And I think we really need to think about this thing of creating a movement and a commission. The Kisan Commission is a great idea. I hope it comes through. I will now open the forum for discussion. Please, you can ask your questions briefly. Please keep the questions very brief and pointed. You can put on your mic and do it, or you can also put some in the chat boxes.
I would like to ask something.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Asad and I teach history at DU, though it exactly doesn't have to do with what I've just heard from the so learned people around. But my anxiety at the moment is what's going to happen in the coming elections, particularly in UP, if the kind of agitations we saw, the Kisan Andolan and others, they are going to impact, and is BJP going to suffer a setback, particularly UP? And if that comes around, where exactly do we go from here? All the participants, all the speakers, or any one of the speakers can answer.
Can any of you volunteer?
I feel Sainath can respond to this question. He is more prepared.
I would also like to add a couple of lines, but let Sainath respond first.
So, but Daljit, please, I was fascinated by your construction of that whole movement, and I would love to hear what you have to say to this question. You are from one of the poll-bound states.
Yeah. So I was part of a panel, rather I was translating Rakesh Tikat's lecture a couple of days ago. So I got the chance to interact with him. Then I'm reading commentaries in newspapers in Punjab and about UP in national newspapers like Indian Express and other portals. So I'll come back to the point I raised, that there were certain things that were there right in the beginning and they are still there. And then the experience we had when they were sitting at that point in Delhi at their pickets. So they came with their own anxieties and then this experience. And now most of the people, particularly the leaders, they are returning to their basic anxieties they came with. And there are very few leaders who have transformed. So there are a couple of people who have transformed and they are admitting and they're saying it again and again. So my apprehension about UP is that this movement particularly will not have great impact on the election. I'm sorry to say, I would have preferred to say it otherwise, but let me tell you where my apprehensions are coming from. First, the organization from UP which were involved, they had the past. And then this movement came, and this movement came with a lot of pressure from a lot of players. So they were, those pressures were creating a kind of stalemate where it was not possible for most of the organizations to go haywire or talk about the agendas which were not suitable to the movement, which were not taking the movement forward. So while they were silent on certain issues, they were vocal on certain issues, it doesn't mean that their earlier apprehensions or their earlier anxieties were not there. So I found that Mr. Rakesh Tikat was really reluctant to talk against BJP, to talk about Yogi, and to take a stance against cow vigilantism and other things. So, but the positive point, which I feel, is that the citizenry, they got to taste a kind of victory which was never imagined a couple of years ago. So that kind of experience, what can it make people think, and can they work in tandem with each other? Can they work as groups? So it is yet to be seen. But I have my apprehensions about UP. As far as Punjab, so Punjab was not asked about, so I'll not comment on that. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, next speaker.
Yeah. Oh, will Jagmati say something then?
Please, Sainath, please.
Okay. I thought I heard Asad say that, the questioner, I thought I heard Asad say that he's from the discipline of history and it doesn't have much to do with what I think it has a hell of a lot to do with what we're discussing, Asad. Yeah. I mean, the history of Indian agriculture of the last 70 years is simply...
I totally agree with you, Sainath. That's why I asked you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, continue.
Right. So, look, anything about elections is, your guess is as good as mine, you know, and it's entirely chancy and a personal subjective opinion. Here's my personal subjective opinion. Goa and Manipur, it doesn't matter who wins, BJP forms the government. That's what happened the last time. It lost both states. It formed the government. Okay, so that's what I think will happen there. Uttarakhand, I believe they could lose. Simply because, I mean, when you've changed 3 chief ministers in under 2 years, of course, there's always the Congress there to oblige by committing harakiri. But they've had to change 3 chief ministers in 2 years, under 2 years probably. And I think they're in a bad shape there. They might lose. In Punjab, the BJP is not in the race. They're not in the, they're not a contender for power in any case. UP, I think what Daljit said is what I would largely agree with. Just to come at it from a slightly different angle or approach, I believe the Kisan movement, one, as he said, there's a more awakened citizenry. Second, I believe it will have an impact of some level, of some kind, in Western UP. There it will have some impact. It will have such an impact. The problem with UP, and there is always a problem with UP, is that in 3 visits to it in 2021, I found that there were increasing levels of discontent with Yogi. Nobody is discussing what happened in the COVID mismanagement. We have forgotten about the thousands of bodies clogging the rivers, etc. There is very serious discontent with Yogi and the government. And however, whatever I do, I can't see the opposition numbers adding up to a victory. I can't see that happening now, as of now. I believe Akhilesh has advanced. He's incrementally, minimally, incrementally gained something every day. I mean, you've had the top Congress leader in West UP go over to him yesterday, right? And he is using an approach which the BJP used in the previous election. Alliances with a large number of small caste-based, sub-region-based bodies who have been with the BJP and have lost and felt that they gained nothing from it. I believe that the 312 seats that the BJP won out of the 405 last time, That is going to be impossible for them. And actually, the opposition last time gifted the BJP about 100 seats by giving the Congress. Akhilesh gave the Congress 114 seats, of which they won 7. You know, and it was that bad. And this time also they demanded a minimum 100 seats. So you still have multiple opposition fronts. I believe the BSP is not seen at all as a contender for power, and that's affecting its financial status. It's not able to raise the kind of money it did by the sale of tickets and everything else. It's not, because people don't think you're winning. They're not going to pay that much for your ticket. And so you have but it has a certain core vote. It will not fall like that. It will not lose that entirely. The Congress has a certain vote, however minimal, but too spread out and diffused. The Akhilesh Samajwadi Party has a core vote and is going to get a large number of seats, which it lost last time by 5,000 votes or thereabouts. Because this time it is contesting much more sensibly, putting the candidates who can win over there. But all said and done, when you look at BJP and its alliance, Congress, SP, and Basapa, the 3 opposition vote fronts, they're, whatever the state of alliance is, none of the opposition alliances, the math adds up the math correctly for a victory. However, you might see the BJP fall by a very large, lose a very large number of seats, which sparks another dynamic in UP, which is the factionalism in the Uttar Pradesh, the anti-Yogi faction in Uttar Pradesh. These are the possibilities, and who knows what happens in the next 20 days, but that's where I see the elections at.
Okay, let's go ahead. Next question, please. I'm sure there are more questions.
May I?
Please.
I'm Jyoti Raina. I teach in Gargi College. My question is to Sainath. You mentioned that the GDP of the country shrank by almost 7% during one of the pandemic years, yet the individual wealth of several businessmen increased manifold. What are the specific processes and tendencies that make this kind of asymmetric wealth inequality further possible in contemporary India?
Well, you know, it's called capitalism. And well, more specifically, we can call it disaster capitalism, right? You know, Jyoti, it's not the first time this is happening. Go back to 2004, December 26, 2004, when the tsunami struck this country. 11 countries were devastated by the tsunami, of which 5 had serious major stock exchanges. They were also the 5 worst affected countries of the tsunami: Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Malaysia. Indonesia lost nearly 250,000 human lives. Guess what? In the first week after the tsunami, the stock exchanges of all these 5 nations attained levels, historic levels, that they had never seen in their existence. Mumbai, the stock Sensex was struggling around 4,000, 5,000. It broke the 6,000 barrier and is today at about 60,000 or whatever obscene figure it is. Indonesia's case is even more interesting. The JSC, the Jakarta Stock Exchange, literally was rocked at its fundamentals by the earthquake, by the tsunami quake, okay? The stock exchange nearly collapsed, but the stock exchange sensitive index reached the highest it had ever in its history. So the building was rocked by the earthquake, but the economy rocks, right? So it the stock exchange just shot up. Sri Lanka, the CSE, the composite share index of the Colombo Stock Exchange, CSI of the CSE, reached within 12 points of its highest, which was the year of its founding. The SETI, the Stock Exchange Thailand International, broke all previous records over a 1 month period. Malaysia, KLSC, the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange, likewise set some records of its own. The simple fact of disaster capitalism or capitalism in general is that the extreme prosperity of the few has to flow from the extreme misery of the many. How else do you make money? Okay, how else could you make money, Jyoti, when the economy was shrinking, but these 100, by the way, they were 102 and they became 140. Now, the second part of answer to your question, just look at the sectors in which the new billionaires came. We added 38 new dollar billionaires, and we are now third in the world. We are 101 in the Global Hunger Index, 130 in the UN Human Development Index, and third in the world in the number of dollar billionaires. We have 2.5 times the number of dollar billionaires Japan has. We have more than Canada can ever dream of. Okay. Now, the thing is that who were the biggest gainers? The two biggest gainers were Mukesh Ambani and Adani. Look at which sectors they're in. But a whole new two groups stood out brilliantly, and all you guys, teachers and professors should know this. One of the biggest gainers was IT, particularly in the field of online education. Baiju's value more than doubled. His personal wealth, he added 186 billion rupees. 186 billion rupees to his personal wealth in those 12 months. The Forbes figures are all personal wealth. They're not talking about the corporate wealth and the Reliance system. Okay. Now, who were the biggest, who stood out like anything? Healthcare. Now, India we had 102 billionaires. It became 140. 24 of the 140 are in the health sector. Okay, 24. Now, the top 10 of those 24 cumulatively added every day of that year, cumulatively added 5 billion rupees to the kitty. Every day, 24 hours, 5 billion rupees. Now, you know also that with the disaster come contracts. Now, the entire vaccine rigmarole, India was the leading manufacturer of vaccines at low cost when you had public sector units like the Haffekine Institute, those institutions. These were those institutions in the public domain brought you your success in pulse polio, in polio, in various kinds of vaccines. Yeah, this time you handed it over to one or two companies who took forever and sold a lot of it abroad. Vaccine in Africa, they are now talking of vaccine apartheid. The main company in Johannesburg, which produced 10 million doses of vaccines in August 2020, not a single dose was used in South Africa. It was all of it went to European countries. So much so that the former Prime Minister of Britain, Gordon Brown, wrote a piece in Guardian protesting what was happening. Here, these 10 guys, remember, 24 billionaires in the health sector in a country which has one of the lowest spending in GDP on health, 1.28% or something obscene like that. Yeah, but the health sector was a great beneficiary. IT sector was another. So, Jyoti, you can see from which sectors they've come. And the principles, as I told you, you're going to squeeze the poor to enrich the already affluent. That's what happened.
There is a question from Ajay Maharkar asking that how do you ensure that the Kisan Commission doesn't become another bureaucratic exercise?
The whole point, well, thanks for that question. I think that any action we take, any activity we take, will always face these dangers. You know, there's no you can't go to the mall and buy a kit that guarantees you no bureaucratic control. That's not. But simply, the entire exercise is based on getting it out of institutional bureaucracies. It's based. It's like the questions Daljit was dealing with. Who are the leaders? Who were the leaders? Who were these people? I think that the farmers gave us, made some of the questions thrown at them look almost irrelevant by the success of their unity and action. I'm saying the Kisan Commission is not going to be consisting of bureaucrats. There may be one or two ex-bureaucrats perhaps, but it's going to be people chosen by the farmers' unions, by the Kisan Andolan, acceptable to them, and having that extraordinary sense of standing and respect in the public. And there's a question for all of us. How do we stop it from getting bureaucratic? By being active ourselves in public action, in appearing before that commission and holding it to account, by holding it to accountability. Because today, let's face it, you are simply unable to hold government and judiciary to accountability. So since we can't hold them to accountability, we have a greater chance of holding a Kisan Commission, a public body, to accountability.
Daljit ji, there is a question for you about the impact on Punjab elections.
So the question is, how would you politically evaluate the Samyukt Samaj Morcha in Punjab? What impact it will have in the assembly elections in Punjab? See, as we were talking about the number of organizations who were involved in the agitation. So there were organizations whose impact or the support base is confined to single sugar mill. And then there were organizations whose impact was confined to a particular crop producers, like potato producers in particular areas. So now those organizations are back. So now they will be fighting the elections with their support base, along with the goodwill earned over a period of time during this issue. So the goodwill will get them good coverage in the media. So you will find the representatives on channels, on YouTube channels, and Punjab has seen great growth of YouTube channels and Facebook channels, which will produce a lot of content about those. But the issue is, as they are projecting themselves to be the real representatives of the Kisan Samyukt Morcha, which is quite difficult to imagine that. See, the largest organizations, I'm going to count: Bharati Kisan Union, Ugraha.
Yeah.
So they have their organizations working in, they claim that they are working in 17 districts out of 22 districts. So they are not with that electoral alliance. They have published a pamphlet of 6 pages. This is a beautiful pamphlet. People should read about it. Most of the time, these pamphlets get ignored, where they have stated their position, the future of the protest, the movement itself, and the role of the alliance which is going to contest election. So they are not part of this alliance. Although Mr. Rajewal, who is heading this Samyukt Samaj Morcha, he claims that वो हमारे भाई हैं. But this bhai argument has no value. It doesn't carry any currency. And let me tell you, before this protest, ये भाई भाई एक दूसरे के बारे में मतलब they were not in a position to sit with each other. They couldn't talk to each other. वो तो इस it was just during this movement that they were collaborating, they were cooperating, and they were organizing joint rallies, but otherwise they don't. So BKU Ugraha is against it, and then Kirti Kisan Union, another big organization, they are against it. Then BKU Dukonda, big organization, they are against it. And then there are other organizations. So they claims that 22 organizations are supporting it. And some of them are just one sugar mill, mill unions. So they are small unions. And I don't think that they will get good results in their favor. The reason I am stating it, and I'm so categorical and I'm ready to take risk of stating this, is that most of the people who are writing their manifestos, who are talking about the issues that they are going to take up during this election, they are the people who are always in search of a third alternative. So whether it was PPP, that is Punjab People's Party, which was formed by Manpreet Singh Badal, nephew of Prakash Singh Badal, and now finance minister of Congress Party. So these are the people who were writing his manifestos. And then Aam Aadmi Party, and then there were smaller other experiments like Lok Party. So I don't think that in this election they will gain anything. Had there been an alliance with Aam Aadmi Party, they could have gained. At that time, if they would have an alliance with Aam Aadmi Party, they were really in the contest. But now there is no alliance with no mainstream party, so I don't think that they stand any chance. The only loss of the movement is that they will get discouraged after the result. Whereas the organizations who are not participating in the election, so they will mobilize their cadre, and they claim that they need to occupy this alternative space where they can mobilize the cadres against any government whosoever is in the power to create a kind of impact on the policies or in the decision making. I think this is the situation here. Yeah.
There's a question from Rajesh. Rajesh, what are you going to ask yourself?
Well, my question was to Sainath, because you talked about some retired bureaucrats, possibility of getting into the Kisan Commission and all. What I'm seeing in recent times, some of the former bureaucrats who apparently had been sympathetic to the protests and also beginning to sing a different tune. Several of them have written saying, how it's going to be very difficult to make an estimate, the complications involved. So, essentially one gets the impression that there will be attempts to drag the issue on the MSP, guaranteed MSP law. So how should the farmers now, when they come back in the new year, 14th is the meeting, how should they strategize to make sure that they stay on track, that this kind of gets driven to a meaningful outcome?
Rajesh, I think you know that I did not say that this commission is going to be comprising bureaucrats. It is going to be comprising farmers. I said maybe there will be a bureaucrat.
I'm saying, I'm talking about some of the retired bureaucrats.
Yeah. Never mind. There are retired bureaucrats who are that way. And by the way, if I'm guessing correctly, some of the people who you think were sympathetic and have turned tail were never truly all that sympathetic. Okay. I have interacted with them, and they write occasional pieces of the very much the Indian Express approach of saying, talk to the farmers, it's important, persuade them to do what? To go against their interests. So the Kisan Commission is about it's an opportunity to build an alliance controlled by the interests of the farmers of every part of the country. We've even made a note on it, which we'll come out with, showing how it has to be representative of non-green revolution areas also. It cannot be green revolution centric. All these things are taken into account for that. But on the MSP issue, first and foremost, I feel that maybe this is one of my regrets. I always had this anxiety about it. I feel that we made too much of a focus on the MSP issue, number one. Okay, I'm saying at the expense of issues, I think it's an extremely important issue, but there were issues like indebtedness, land loss, okay? There were several other issues which do, by the way, come up in the Swaminathan Commission reports and recommendations. Those were lost while we made it entirely around MSP. And in MSP, we restricted ourselves to asking for a law. Most people wanted a law that makes MSP mandatory. Fine. I'm trying to tell you that MSP doesn't, a law on MSP doesn't mean a damn if you don't have legal guarantee of procurement. You know, Maharashtra is the leader in this racket of declaring high MSPs whenever there is distress in Yavatmal, Vidarbha. They would declare very high MSPs for cotton, and then they would not procure. They would not procure. Three things they did, three ways they did of mocking the MSP. One, they mocked it by opening half the number of procurement centers that the state's farmers required. Two, if the procurement center was to open regularly on October 1st, they would open the centers, half the number of centers required would be opened around October 21st, 22nd. The second way, many farmers cannot hold out that long. They sell their produce to the first commission agent, Arthya, who comes along, or their regular commission agent. The third thing is they close these procurement centers 20 days early so that late arrivals to the market are also forcibly diverted to the private sector. Okay, I'm saying that if you don't have procurement guarantees, then an MSP guarantee means little. I think that we didn't nuance that issue enough. And secondly, we got so much into it. Look, there are millions of Adivasi farmers for whom MSP is, they aspire to it, but it's not an immediate issue at all. Forest rights is a much more important thing. I'm saying that if that Andolan is to grow, it's got to take on board much broader, much wider interests and build much larger class alliances. And therefore, I'm saying that, well, that's what I'm trying to tell you about MSP. I think it's an extremely important issue. But I think peasant indebtedness, I think you'll agree, is a gigantic issue in this country. I didn't see that. I didn't see that we were able to position that center stage and foreground. Yeah.
That is actually absolutely crucial that, you know, peasant indebtedness is a much more crucial issue. Any more questions?
I think there are two more questions in the chat box, one by Dharmender Kumar Shobhajit.
Yeah. Dharmendra's question is, farmer struggle is limited in particular geographical area. What can be done to expand its base to other areas? Are they willing to expand in other areas? I think Sainath is already speaking on it. Can we just briefly address this? Is there any particular strategy to do that? I mean,
yeah,
it's very straightforward and simple. That that's why I said a Kisan Commission or any other body has got to be representative of farmers beyond the green revolution areas. It's got to be representative of farmers east, northeast, livestock farmers, dairy farmers. It's got to be representative of people from, whether the Rayatwari areas or the Malwari areas or whoever. You've got to be representing all of them on that. The extraordinary success of the Kisan Andolan was, I was thinking on it again as Daljit was speaking. Look at the extraordinary spectrum of people they brought together, from guys concentrated in one sugar mill to the BKU Ugraha, which I think, by the way, I believe that the claim of 17 districts out of 22 is a genuine one. I think they're the most disciplined farmers union that I have seen in the struggle, and in Punjab also. So when you take up the other issues, okay, please also, I want to tell you one thing. It's not as if other farmers have not been protesting, have not been fighting. Our friends in the Kisan Andolan, they descended in an Occupy Delhi move. You see what you did? You also took the war to the media, okay? You landed up on their doorstep. They could not ignore you. 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, 2018 March, 40,000 Adivasi Kisans marched from Nashik to Mumbai, 182 kilometers in 40 degrees heat. Most of them too poor to own footwear. They didn't have tractors. They didn't have anything. It started at the bus stop of Nashik with 2,000. Then 12,000 people left the city's gates. By the time it reached Mumbai, it was 40,000. And then the next thing that happened was that the middle classes of Mumbai came out in thousands, and it went past 50,000. Teachers, by the way, in the 2018 Delhi March on Parliament, farmers came from 22 states and 4 union territories. Okay, it's not, others have issues. They want to be with you. Incidentally, please let me tell you that the same Nashik, which sent 40,000 people to Mumbai, at the height of the pandemic, sent 2,000 farmers in a single caravan to Singhu, Tikri, and mostly to Shahjahanpur camp. Okay, to the Shahjahanpur camp. It was interesting. If you get to Shahjahanpur, suddenly at the kitchen side, Marathi voices. Okay. In other places, Telugu voices, because 800 farmers came from Guntur, Krishna. Many of them remained as volunteers. Out of the 3,000 odd who went from Maharashtra, 200, 300 remained as volunteers to the very end. I think that's phenomenal. I think that's phenomenal. So you can do it. You have to take up the issues of others, other classes. You have to take up the issues of farm labor far more strongly than we have done. You got to take up the issues of, water policy, because right now this country is privatizing water rapidly. So there's a huge number of issues. We do that. The protests are there. The question is marrying the energies of the different protests.
I'll just add to what P. Sainath has just stated. I think what he's saying, it is happening to some extent in Punjab and Haryana. So when the farmer unions returned from Delhi, so they came with their own lessons, and then there were questions that when the farmers are leading, so there are other people who are joining them in solidarity, who are supporting them, as P. Sainath has mapped it wonderfully well. I think that is one of the thing that scholars need to do, that how people from different parts of India came and stayed there as volunteers, as most of the narrative is confined to Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. So it is very much number-centric explanation of the protest, I think. But the point I was making is that let me state the concrete examples. For example, so there are other sections of the society which are organizing protests for their demands, whether it is Anganwadi workers, or it is unemployed unions, or it is teacher unions. So there are Kisan unions which are saying that these organizations were part of, and these sections of the society were part of the protest in Delhi. So we need to respond. So they organize langars for them. So wherever it is possible to join them in numbers, so they go and they join them. So any kind of possible help they offer, and it is happening in the villages of Punjab. For example, my village is in Ludhiana. So in Ludhiana there was a protest by unemployed youth. So people from my village, so they took langar and they went there, they supported them, they are offering them tea in this winter. So I think the solidarities which we witnessed over there, they are going to form another level at different places. So similarly, BKU Ugrahan, they are forming their units in Haryana. So recently there was a meeting where BKU Ugrahan formed unit in 5 districts of Haryana. So the meeting was in Fatehabad. And similarly, other organizations, they are expanding. So they are trying to tighten their support base. They are trying to rebuild their organizational structure. I think that is happening, which will be really useful for the future struggles. I assume so. Yeah.
There's a question. I think Ravi Kaushal wants to ask to Jagmati. Please go ahead.
और सौम्य जी एक क्वेश्चन नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी से रिलेटेड भी है, चैट बॉक्स में आप
हाँ वो कर लेंगे। तो पहले तो रवि
ओके ओके
जगमती।
दैट्स फाइन।
जगमती मैम, एक मेरा जो सवाल आपसे था, देखिए जब हम किसान आंदोलन को देख रहे हैं पंजाब और हरियाणा में, पंजाब को मैं इधर छोड़ देता हूँ, लेकिन हरियाणा में जब हम आते हैं तो हम ये पा रहे हैं अब कि बीजेपी भी अपने स्तर पे जो है कोशिश ये कर रही है कि जो आंदोलन का असर है उसको किस तरीके से कम किया जाए, क्योंकि जो भी फोर्सेज हैं ये नहीं चाह रही हैं कि ये जो है एक डीप रूट ले विद इन द मास और वो फिर अपने रोजमर्रा के सवाल और बाकी सारी चीजों पे भी आए। एक कोशिश हमने ये देखी कि जैसे ये कितलाना के पास जो एक खापों की पंचायत थी जिसमें अलग अलग इश्यूज थे, और जब मैं वहां पे ग्राउंड पे बात कर रहा था तो लोग ये बता रहे थे कि ये जो इश्यूज जो इन्होंने लिए हैं पर्टिकुलरली वो इसलिए लिए हैं ताकि किसान आंदोलन से ध्यान भटकाया जाए। ये जो कोशिश है ये कितनी डेस्परेट है ऑन द ग्राउंड, अगर आप बता पाए कि ये कोशिश किस तरीके से और कितनी डेस्परेट है। दूसरी चीज मैं आपसे जानना चाह रहा था पर्टिकुलरली ये कि देखिए जब मैं अलग अलग जगहों पे जा रहा था और रिपोर्टिंग के लिए, और जब मैं लोगों से बात कर रहा था तो ये समझ में आ रहा था कि एक कलेक्टिव गुस्सा है, मतलब अलग अलग सेक्शंस का। वुमेन से बात करता था तो वो मतलब गैस और घर की जितनी मतलब एलपीजी का है, डीजल का है, बाकी जो है वो सारी चीजें हैं। क्या वो किसान आंदोलन की राजनीति को भी वो समझ रही थी क्या? क्योंकि हमने देखा कि लीडर्स तो आ रहे हैं, लेकिन क्या आम घरों की या सामान्य घरों की जो महिलाएं हैं वो ये इस किसान आंदोलन की राजनीति को समझ रही हैं क्या?
जगमती जी।
हाँ, रवि ने जो बताया कि बीजेपी बहुत कॉन्शियस एफर्ट्स कर रही है, ये जो इसका इम्पैक्ट क्रिएट हुआ है इसको फिर से डिवाइड करने का, उन लोगों को जो इकट्ठे आए हैं उनके जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट के इश्यूज हैं इंटरेस्ट के, उनको उन्होंने उभारने की कोशिश करी है। और खास तौर पे जिस पंचायत को रवि रेफर कर रहा था वहां पे ये हमने देखा है कि जो लोग सबसे एक्टिवली इन चीजों में इन्वॉल्व हुए और जिन्होंने ऑर्गेनाइज किया उनमें से ज्यादातर किसी ना किसी रूप में बीजेपी के साथ अलाइड रहे हैं और उनकी पहचान भी उस तरह की है। और इधर से सरकार ने जो 18 से 21 साल मैरिजेबल एज का जो लेके आई कानून, इसकी आड़ में उन लोगों ने बहुत सक्रिय तरीके से कोशिशें की हैं, परंतु इधर से हमने भी कोशिशें की और हमने भी ये बना के रखा कि किसान आंदोलन को किसी भी तरह से इन मुद्दों के ऊपर बंटना नहीं चाहिए, हमें अलग अलग यूनियंस को। अभी हमारे किसान फार्मर्स एजिटेशन के जो मुद्दे हैं, एमएसपी और दूसरे, वो हमारे सामने खड़े हैं। ये तो वो कानून थे कि जिनका असर फ्यूचर में होने वाला था हमारे ऊपर, लेकिन ऑलरेडी जो हालत है किसानी की, वो तो 2,668 रुपया पर मंथ अगर आपकी आमदनी है, 2 एकर्स लैंड होल्डिंग जिनकी है, जबकि 86% लोग वो हैं, तो वो सरवाइव कर ही नहीं सकते। संकट तो बिल्कुल सिर पर खड़ा है, फिर से आंदोलन लेने पड़ेंगे। इसलिए अपनी यूनिटी को बना के रखें हम, और इधर उधर के इश्यूज पे जाने की बजाय उसके ऊपर फोकस रखें अपना। जो भी सेलिब्रेशंस करें, जो भी आगे के संकल्प सभाएं हमने नाम दिया उनका, केवल सेलिब्रेशन नहीं, हमने बोला संकल्प सभा, कि संकल्प लें कि हम अपनी एकता को बना के रखेंगे और अपने जो उद्देश्य हैं उनके लिए आगे भी आंदोलन की तैयारियां करेंगे। तो इस तरह से काउंटर स्ट्रेटजी भी हमने इवॉल्व तो करी है। और जहां तक महिलाओं का सवाल है, जैसे मैंने पहले भी बताया कि वो केवल ये 3 काले कानून के खिलाफ उनका एंगर नहीं था, बल्कि उनके गांव का जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, जो बिल्कुल बेरोजगारी है, उनके बच्चों के लिए किसी तरह का फ्यूचर नहीं है, यहाँ पे शादी नहीं हो रही, रोजगार नहीं मिल रहा, सेक्स रेशियो की वजह से शादियां भी नहीं हो रही हैं। तो ये सारे सवालों की पॉलिटिक्स भले ही वो उतनी माइन्यूटली उनको ना समझती हो, लेकिन ये मुद्दे उनके जहन में बिल्कुल थे, और वो इनके ऊपर बात भी करती थी। और उन्होंने जो गीत लिखे हैं, जो गाए हैं, उनमें ये मुद्दे भी उठाए हैं, अपने भाषणों में भी उठाए हैं। बिल्कुल। थैंक यू।
I think we should move to the close now, but
Samajit, Ramurthy has raised his hand. Please.
okay, yeah. But before that, one question I think Tanuja has asked, then Anita Rampal has asked about can we form question to Sainath. What will be your advice on the new education policy and the teachers movement? Can we also form a Lok Shiksha Ayog?
You know, I don't see why not, in the sense that Anita knows much better than me. She knows a lot more about education than I ever will. One of the few things admirable in the politics of education in the US, and they are very few to be admired, is I've always respected the idea their school teachers unions, NFT, every year bring out a report on the state of education. They make arguments and positions from the point of view of what is affecting their students. And I think that's a very admirable thing. I haven't followed for the last 5 years, so I don't know whether it still exists. But I do know that they did this for decades. And I think so, why not? I mean, it will also draw a lot of support from parents. If teachers are there, not just on economic demands, but are there saying, this is bad for your kids. This is good for your kids. Try doing this. So yeah, why not?
Okay. Ramurthy.
राममूर्ति जी, आप अनम्यूट कर लीजिए अपने आप को।
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, partly what I wanted to ask has been asked by some of the people, especially Anita ji and previous one. But still, I want to seek response of both. Three of the speakers on the issue of synergy between the other issues. We made reference, and I want to hear particularly in context of education. Most of the teacher organization, particularly, all those who are pro-people teacher organization, they are quite vocally raising the issue of rejection of NEP. whereas we feel that parents are not going to respond that appropriately as it should have been. So I specifically want to ask Jagmati ji that कि क्या वो देखती हैं कि जो नई शिक्षा नीति है इसके खिलाफ भी किसानों को जत्थेबंद किया जाए, एक, और दूसरा आई वांट टू हियर फ्रॉम पी साइनाथ एंड दलजीत बोथ कि to what extent they seems possible that people should raise this issue in the light of what is being proposed in NEP, which is very very clear. I don't need to explain it at this juncture. और दूसरा सवाल जगमती जी से खास है, जैसे दलजीत जिस डिस्कशन का रेफरेंस दे रहे थे उसमें राकेश टिकैत यहाँ तक भी कह देते हैं कि कम्युनलिज्म या सांप्रदायिकता का कोई मुद्दा नहीं है। तो क्या आपको लगता है कि संयुक्त राष्ट्र मोर्चा, संयुक्त किसान मोर्चा ये नहीं समझता कि जिस तरह से घृणा का प्रसार अभी पिछले कुछ दिनों से तो बहुत ही तेजी से किया जा रहा है और एक तरह से ये प्रचार किया जा रहा है कि लोग इसे स्वीकार करने लग गए हैं, इस परिस्थिति में संयुक्त किसान मोर्चा को जो है ये खासतौर पे ऐसे मुद्दे जो सब लोगों को प्रभावित कर रहे हैं उनको भी अपने अभियान का हिस्सा बनाना चाहिए? जी
Jagmati ji, can you please respond?
नई जो शिक्षा नीति और शिक्षा का जो सवाल है ये असल में ही बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। आज मैं इसमें डिस्कशन में जो शामिल हुई, भागकर आई, असल में एक प्रोटेस्ट चल रहा था यहाँ पे 134A के तहत जो RET और बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन के बच्चों को जो स्कूल में एडमिशन देना है और उनको मतलब महीना भर से सारी कड़ाके की ठंड जो है वो इनके सिर के ऊपर से गई है DC ऑफिस के सामने बैठे हुए कि बच्चों को एडमिशन उन्होंने पहले स्कूल से सर्टिफिकेट ले लिया है, दूसरे स्कूल वाले एडमिशन नहीं दे रहे हैं। और जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर था आज जो बात कर रहा था वो कह रहा था कि हम जो प्राइवेट स्कूल के मालिक हैं उनके खिलाफ कोर्सन तो नहीं कर सकते जी, देखो आपका अधिकार तो है। हमने कहा कि अभी हम जाके अगर स्कूल के वहां पे अपना उनको कहेंगे कि भी एडमिशन करो और नथिंग डूइंग, यहाँ से निकलने नहीं देंगे आपको बाहर स्कूल से जो है, तो आप कोर्सन पे बहुत तेजी से तैयार हो जाओगे। उनके खिलाफ कोर्सन क्यों नहीं कर सकते आप जो वायलेट कर रहे हैं सरकार के लॉ को? तो इतना पार्टीजनिंग और इस तरह की जो शिक्षा का जो हालत है यहाँ पे हमें तो लगता है कि बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट इश्यू है और आने वाले दिनों में हम खुद भी कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि शिक्षा और स्वास्थ्य ये दोनों इश्यूज को भी अपने जो कलेक्टिव मूवमेंट जो है उनका कंसर्न बनाएं बहुत सचेत तरीके से, और इसके ऊपर रियली काम करने की जरूरत है। और दूसरा थोड़ा सा सौम्य में एक और बात कहना चाह रही थी।
बिल्कुल।
हाँ, राकेश टिकैत ने कम्युनल उसके ऊपर मुजफ्फरनगर में जिस तरह से अल्लाहू अकबर हर हर महादेव का नारा जो लगाया वहां पे और रैली में जितने मुखर तरीके से वो बोले वो बहुत वेलकम और उसका संदेश भी बहुत अच्छा गया कि उसी जगह पे आप उस रियलाइजेशन के साथ वो नारा लगा रहे हैं ऐसे। तो मुझे ये लगता है कि कम्युनलिज्म के इशू के ऊपर उनकी मतलब पोजीशंस तो हैं, वो अलग है कि कहीं पे वो मतलब थोड़ा बहुत जीभ दबाते हैं, कहीं पे बहुत कंसिस्टेंसी भले ही ना हो पर पोजीशंस तो हैं, मैं ये कहना चाह रही थी।
मतलब उसमें भी आप चेंज देखे होंगे ना, पहले जो राकेश टिकैत का वो था और अब इसके आई थिंक बहुत चेंज हुआ है।
हाँ, कम्युनल इशू को लेके हमें बहुत बड़ा चेंज जो है, बहुत बड़ा एहसास उनके अंदर लगता है, लेकिन जहां तक महिलाओं के संबंध में उनके प्रॉपर्टी राइट का सवाल है, उनका चॉइस मैरिज का जो सवाल है, अनफॉर्चुनेटली वो जिस स्टेज पे थे वहां पे इनके खिलाफ प्रस्ताव पास किए गए। अभी कितलाना टोल के ऊपर, जिसको रवि रेफर कर रहा था, तो महिलाओं के संदर्भ में अभी बहुत मतलब बड़े बदलाव जो नेतृत्व है उसमें कम दिख रहे हैं, हालांकि महिलाएं असर्ट कर रही हैं बहुत.
I think any quick comments, Sainath and Daljit? We'll close the discussion after that.
Yeah, so I just want to add about this new economic policy and the role of farmers movement. As far as Punjab's farmer movement is concerned, they are very much aligned with the teacher organizations and student organizations. As most of the organization, particularly BKU Ugraha, Kirti Kisan Union, and then there are other organizations, most of the leaders, either they were teachers or they came directly from student unions. So that solidarity they have retained with them. And that solidarity is not just to make the number at the protest sites. So they support each other's issues. And as a result, you find that most of the protest spaces where these organizations are sitting, they are populated with issues like health issues and issues of education. So I think that is happening in Punjab. And it is not just happening now, it is happening consistently. For example, BKU Ugraha, most of their second rank leadership and even their general secretary, they are retired teachers. And most of the time, I feel amazed when I see them writing press notes or making comments on different issues. They are so well informed and so sophisticated in their articulation. So I usually say it publicly that if you want to learn Punjabi and nuanced Punjabi, then BKU Ugraha, that is the classroom where you should go. So they're damn good in it. Yeah.
Very quickly, I do see a link between these movements I'm saying I'm hopeful that we are able to make people see the links, because I think the problems that you're raising on education are very substantially linked to the problems of privatization of education, increasing privatization and undercutting. I think that's a huge issue to be connected to farmers' movements and others. You know, how many NSS surveys have shown us that the per rupee, what the rural person spends on education is twice that, what the rural person spends on health, for instance, is twice that on what they spend on education. So health, education. I have a simple call where I'm saying that these struggles should be waged on a framework of and demand of justice, food justice, not food security, food justice, health justice, you know, education justice. Your constitution begins with that word, okay, on its first preamble. Justice for all, social, economic, political. I would add gender and climate and culture to it, but there you are, it's there, it's implied. So it means that the way of bringing these different groups together must necessarily include anti-privatization battles. That has to be very, very central to its DNA in that kind of a struggle. And all you teachers, I'm sure many of you have seen and read, the one NSS report in 5 years that this government actually allowed to be published, probably because they didn't understand it, which was social indicators of consumption in education. There are 5 tables in that, 31 to 33, 32A, 33B, 5 tables, which show you how much of a farce the idea of online education is in India. It simply means millions of kids you are driving away from education. So I'm saying that I think that I would like to see those kind of reports coming out of the teachers' unions, I would like to see them follow up on that and put it. It's a battle against privatization. It's got to be, look, the farmers are going to be screwed when the banks are privatized. What little credit they're getting now. And the banks are being rapidly set up for privatization. So your battle comes back to liberalization, privatization, neoliberal globalization. You don't have the luxury of saying, I will only fight on this front.
I think on that note, and I think it's the crux of all the thing that we have been talking for now almost more than 2.5 hours. Wonderful session, and to all the three speakers, we are really grateful that you came, and so many complex issues you took up, the way you linked up and you complemented each other. Thank you very much. I think Abha, will you like to say something?
Nandita, thanks a lot. This was a very useful session, and we will share the recording so that it reaches a larger audience. Thanks a lot for your time, and I think जो P साईनाथ ने जिस तरीके से conclude किया, I think वही crux of the matter है, सारी चीजें जुड़ी हुई हैं, ये जो extensive commercialization हो रहा है, I think we have to come together to fight that. I think that is the main crux of the whole thing, and where education, chahe farming ka ho, chahe climate change ho, everything, I think that is what is happening to all of us. So we stand committed to fight, to bring together the movements, and this program also, this webinar, is actually a series to bring together movements, to understand what is happening in one movement, to gain from their thing, and also to forge alliances. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot. Sainath, Daljit ji, Jagmati ji, thanks for your time. We have learned a lot. Thanks a lot.